My name is Jamie Klein. I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire HR. And most importantly, I hope that your family and loved ones are well and you are finding a way to stay positive and test negative during this time. I'm so thrilled that we are gathering for what is a monthly series called Redesigning the Future of Work, where we are looking at the trends that we are all trying to figure out on the fly. And I see a lot of new folks are joining us. And real quick, by way of background, Inspire HR does all things people for organizations that might have challenges on either the CHRO or CEO front, kind of those issues that keep those leaders up at night. We help organizations in one of three ways. We provide fractional interim resources who can parachute in and fill a role. We strategically do projects to help lean teams get mountains of work done. And we train and coach on all issues that modern leaders are trying to tackle today, from diversity, equity, inclusion to leadership in a remote workforce, et cetera. We have 37 part-time experts. They're all W-2s, and we are hailing from 14 states. We work with both Fortune 500s and high growth companies. And clearly the issue of interim talent is near and dear to us. It's something that we do every day, but when I read studies out of Intuit, Harvard, McKinsey, they're talking about this rise of interim talent and this moment that we find ourselves in, and how many organizations are really using it as a secret weapon, if you will, a way to make sure that as part of their long-term talent strategy, they very much have a mashup of both permanent and interim talent available. And there are so many terms these days. We just celebrated 14 years as Inspire. I've been using this term fractional for a while, but we hear everything from fluid, distributed, gig, contingent, consulting. I'm sure by the time this weekend, there might even be a new term that's used. But whatever you call it, organizations like Google, for example, literally have roughly 51%-ish as permanent, and the balance 49-ish truly as some type of contingent. So that is the future of work, and we want to make sure that the Inspire community is very much equipped to operationalize this fantastic strategy. And to help us explore this, I am joined by three esteemed colleagues, just so honored that they are with us. Elaine Mason is an experienced leader in workforce planning, talent practices, and org effectiveness. She currently serves as the Vice President of Talent for Splunk, which is a data platform for security, IT, and DevOps. Prior to that, Elaine was Vice President of People and Communications at Cisco, where she was a business partner for strategy, emerging technologies, and innovation. And she's had various other workforce planning roles at companies, including American Express, where I had the pleasure of being a colleague of hers, Viacom, MTV Networks, et cetera. So Elaine, thrilled to have you here. Gadiel is very much the president of Early Growth. And this is a firm, I always say Early Growth is like the finance version of Inspire. They provide outsourced accounting, finance, tax valuation, and strategic CFO level solutions to early stage and rapidly growing companies throughout every stage of that organization's life cycle. And as an accomplished executive with more than 20 years of sales, marketing, and operations, there's very little he has not seen. And he also mentors and guides entrepreneurs and founders, which is, I know, a passion of his, in identifying the best solutions to power their growth. He's big on giving back, which I love. And one of our Inspire experts, Maribel, is with us, and she has a deep experience in both in-house and interim HR business partner work, as well as employee relations. She also provides executive coaching with real focus on conflict resolution, building stronger relationships. And we are so thrilled that she is going to talk to us about some of her lessons learned, some of the do's and don'ts, if you will, along the way in her journey. But she is a results-driven leader who has partnered with dozens of organizations, including the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, Hess Oil, Prudential, Horizon Blue Cross, and the UN. And we are so happy to have all three of these panelists with us. So let's dive right in on this topic that is very much on the minds of most CEOs and CHROs. So let's kick it off with the do's. When it comes to interim engagements, I'd love to hear from each of you, particularly one successful project and a do that we can share with folks as a key to success. Gadiel, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jamie. This is fantastic. I'm really excited. And I'm dialing in from sunny California, just for everybody out there. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important topic for a lot of businesses and companies out there. And I've been thinking really hard about kind of what those do's and don'ts really mean for these companies. The biggest do that I hammer into our new engagements and our clients. I mean, we are coming in at that CFO level and handling all the transactional accounting. And so for us really is setting those expectations and having a really clear understanding of what duties you need us to handle versus what duties you want to handle yourself, right? And I think, you know, with a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, a lot of first-time founders, they're not exactly sure what they want to hand off or not. So a lot of times it does come up to me and my team to really walk them through, like, hey, here's what we, think for you would be a good deliverable, but having that dialogue is really important. And sometimes, I mean, I think depending on who you are and what type of company and business you are, those deliverables will either be driven by your investors, potentially by your bank, potentially by, just you as the founder and understanding reporting and things like that. But that's kind of my number one do.
Such a good point. Those expectations, like any relationship, are so important to set at the top. Elaine, Maribel, any thoughts from you?
For me, it has, as Gadiel was speaking, setting the expectations with the internal stakeholders on how they should be working with the interim talent, right? So I had a situation where I came in, they had not had the experience of working with an HR leader, and they really didn't know what to expect. So they did a wonderful job. We had a town hall. We talked about what great HR looks like, how they could work with me, but then also what would happen in transition. And we had Q&As and great conversation. That set the stage for the trust, right? So they could immediately start to take advantage of everything that my role was supposed to bring to the organization.
I love it. And I imagine what it's not. So by the organization kind of setting the table that this is what Maribel's here to do, I'd imagine it really set you up for success, especially if organizations are brand new to having a more strategic view of HR. Elaine.
Yeah, I think the only add, because I believe I'm totally aligned with both the other panelists, the only add I'd make is about sustainability, which is eventually when you're a fractional worker or an interim worker, you're going to be exiting, or that's almost the hope, the intention behind the role. I was actually an interim CHRO for a small software firm that was actually in a growth mode, and I was building their HR function for the first time. And they initially brought me in to kind of build out what's their org structure and their roles and their skills and how do they recruit in the right talent. And my job as an interim CHRO was to build those systems in place. But the key for me was finding who was going to own the work post-gig, who was going to make sure that this work was going to have a long tail. And I think that, and we actually did find that person. I essentially trained them as part of me being the interim CHRO. And we actually did this kind of tail down that over time, I actually reduced the time, reduced the volume of work I was doing for them. So we ended up creating a handoff that really supported the work having a long sustainability long after my gig was up.
I love that. And I think of it as these airtight handoffs, if you will. So did you have a transition period where that new leader and you had some overlap to kind of make for that airtight handoff?
Yeah, we actually had that type of overlap. And then we even had what I would say is kind of almost like time release, like a pill. You actually every couple of months I'd kind of check back in, and we actually contracted in that I would do a check-in every couple of months long after the contract was essentially over.
I love that.
Because for me it was quality of the work going in, and for them it was that I came in to give them that sustainability. So yeah, absolutely, the whole way through.
I love that, the time release. We at Inspire, we call it bookends. In an ideal situation, we find the most effective engagements. There's a little bit of overlap before you start, and then that overlap at the end for that smooth handoff. It's all about the business sustainability. All right, so we covered the do's. I'd love to touch on the don'ts. As lifelong learners, I always say we're all works in progress. There are some times, every once in a while, where things do not go to plan. And I'd love any wisdom of any don'ts. Again, we have lots of folks here who perhaps are also thinking of eventually being interim fractional talent. So any wisdom you can share there. Elaine, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure, happy to. So actually, in my prior role at Cisco, we actually had decided to extend the use of a gig worker after we brought them in for something. We brought them in for a specific program design. They were exceptionally good at the program design. We loved working with them so much. We extended their work to actually have them do change management to actually help bring the product that they'd actually help us build to market. The extension didn't work, and ultimately we ended the contract, and it failed for about, I'd say, multiple reasons, but two keys. First was the needs did not align to the gig workers' strength. They were great in this one space. We stretched them out to something that they were not really in their strengths for, and ultimately it showed. And ultimately it required internal capabilities to support the long-term nature of the work. And I don't think we really cognized that up front. And the downside of that was ultimately bringing them in the future became much more of a difficult challenge. So it's really important to get clear on bringing somebody in for interim work that's really leaning into what their best, what their strengths are.
Interesting. And just to get tactical, when you talk about it was harder for them to come in, was it because their brand was a little bit tarnished because they had done something that was more of a stretch assignment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was almost and we did bring them back in, but we had to convince people to trust. And I think that goes back to what Maribel said earlier. Right.
Such a good point. Any other thoughts on this topic of don'ts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big don'ts that I see, I've had a couple of situations where, we work with, early stage companies, but that are fast growing. So I think the needs of those businesses change pretty rapidly as well. One thing that it can be a hurdle sometimes for us as kind of their partner and working with them on the finance side is just the ownership, right? The ownership of who's doing what or what that expectation is. And so sometimes coming in, the founders or the CEOs really want to understand and learn, which is very important. And I think it's key for them to understand every aspect of their business. But if they're rolling up their sleeves a little bit too much and getting in the weeds, then it prevents us from doing our job, right? As being that partner for them and being that expert in that space. And so that's something that it's always kind of a management on both sides, truly understanding and getting aligned there.
And I think you raise a good point. Many times when interim talent comes in, they're joining a team that might have been double hatting for a while and all helping out with HR or finance or whatever it is. And that role clarity needs to be defined, I guess, so that the leader is not so in the weeds. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then to Elaine's point, you are planning for the future, right? The hope is that you continue to grow and scale. And so you will eventually bring in that function in-house, depending on where you get to as a business.
And Maribel, as someone who's played the role of the interim expert countless times, we'd love some wisdom from you on don'ts.
I think for me is don't skimp on giving context and having those crucial conversations with the interim talent so that they have the background information. They don't have to go dig and figure out, okay, what is really going on here? So you can smooth the transition in, and you're really accelerating the process towards success if you just give them that context and say, okay, this is really how it works here, right? And this is what you need to do in order to influence and move this ball forward.
And just kind of give them the skinny on how they can be most effective and all the tools to get there. We talk on the long list of do's. High on the list is this notion of fit, both culture fit and skill fit. And it's the devil's in the details on that. But when we think about the best way to not just with hiring but with project work too, not to be afraid to admit if the fit ain't there, right? If you're not aligned. So are there any processes that we might want to touch on for really measuring the culture and skill fit when beginning an engagement so that things are off to that strong start? Well, and Maribel, if you thoughts.
Yeah. So, for me, it's really about complementing, not derailing. So really doing your homework ahead of time and saying, what are the critical cultural factors that we need? I had a client, they brought in a marketing expert. She was amazingly high energy, but she was coming into a culture where it's highly analytical thinking styles, really much more subdued. And even just as she showed up, it wasn't a cultural fit. And it made that so difficult. So really what is going to add versus derail, and just be really honest with yourselves. I think the other piece of that is have the conversation with the talent. What do they need so that they feel comfortable and they can fit in? They will obviously do their best to come in, but if there's, like the example I was giving you, there's such a break in differences, there's plenty of talent out there.
Yes. Elaine, thoughts?
And just to add, so I totally subscribe to where Maribel is, that it's about culture add, Because if it's just fit, you're going to just you're just rubber stamping. You have more of the same. So I look for a culture add, and someone that really can really create more than what we had without them there. And in my ideal world, because you had asked about kind of our process for measuring.
Yes.
My ideal world, I usually look for a small pilot to test out whether that interim worker has the skills and is additive. We actually were talking about this a couple of days ago when we were prepping, and the phrase we use, it's like, it's your first date. It's like, okay,
Yes.
maybe we're just going to go for cocktails. We're just going to see if this works. And if it works, okay, then maybe we extend to dinner. And then, so for me, in my ideal world, I try small pilots and then usually extend the engagement when we see that there's an ad here, this person is creating meaningful value and they're getting a meaningful value out of the relationship as well.
I love that. The drinks, the appetizer before you go to the dinner. I love it. Gadil, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think all great points. And, we kind of come in from an interesting perspective because sometimes my firm, I mean, we've got 40 plus CFOs that are coming in, and a lot of times we end up being kind of the parents in the room, if you will, right? Because we're overlooking kind of the finance piece and making sure the books are tied together and things like that. But you're exactly right. I mean, I've had situations with certain early stage companies that are just, hey, this person's just not a fit. They're just not aligned. Sometimes it just comes down to the technology moves so fast, right? And so us trying to keep pace with that as well. You just need to make sure you're aligned. So sometimes I can position 2, even 3 CFOs in front of that individual, because I really say, listen, this is a relationship here, back to the dating analogy. Like, we're not just doing this for a month or 2.
Sure.
Like, we want to be there for 2, 3 years, 4 years, or potentially until you really grow and scale. And it's really important to have that open dialogue. You don't want to be shy about it early on, right? And I've had founders before come to me and say, hey, I could go with the CFO, but like, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I'm like, trust me, hurt their feelings now, because you don't want to wait 9 months down the road.
Of course, we all spend more time on work than we do often with family and friends. You better be enjoying the colleagues that you're working with. And I think that culture piece is huge. So Gadil, just to clarify, when you present potential candidates, do you often present, like you were saying, 3 options for your founder to take a peek at just to see who they gel with the best?
Actually, no. Usually we're picking kind of that one individual and trying to match make that way. So usually we go through kind of a vetting process, because for us, a lot of times it comes down to, are you an enterprise SaaS business that's a Series B company? Let me find that relevant experience and background. But we do have kind of that and I don't like calling it an interview. I love the concept of like, hey, you're going on your first date and figuring out if this is a fit or not. I love that concept, and I think I'm going to change my language to reflect that moving forward. But that's what it is, right? I mean, it's what can you truly learn from a business standpoint? All of our folks are high quality, just as Inspire's folks are all high quality, right? So they can do the job, but it's more of like, hey, let's just have a light conversation, see if it's a fit. If it's not a fit, we'll go back to the drawing board. There's no problem there.
When we're in those early stages of determining who is the best match, we sometimes will present 2, sometimes 3 interim HR leaders for them to get to know and see who they think is the match. And we've just learned over time that that's helpful to, again, have these conversations earlier, do that upfront prep to make sure that the culture fit is very much the culture add, as Elaine said, which I love. I'm writing that one down. On the list of don'ts, we in the US, at least, we live in this very litigious society. And I know that it is so important that we very much pay attention to all the laws that swirl around this, with those classifications of employees and contractors. And I know Elaine and Gadil, specifically, as you are hailing from California, California has their AB5 law passed in 2019, and it created these stricter terms for roles like picket, Uber drivers, freelance journalists, musicians, the list goes on. And a lot of employers are a touch on edge of how to navigate that and just make sure that they're absolutely doing the most compliant thing. So I would welcome any wisdom on how organizations can ensure that they remain fully compliant in what is a ever unfolding conversation about those classifications. Yeah, Gadil, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I end up working with a lot of companies coming in and opening up an office in the U.S. And so this is a hot topic of, contractors, 1099 employees, but then, are they really full-time employees? Are they not? Like, what's that fine line that you've got going there? We always ask the question, but more importantly, I point them to a good attorney. Like, you got to make sure you're covered there. You don't want to fall into the trap. I mean, at a high level, it's important to understand that from an accounting perspective, how you kept classifying these folks and everything else. But ultimately, it does come down to just make sure you're checking all those boxes. And that's why working with a firm like yours is tremendous, right? Because you can add a ton of value in trying to classify those folks and really understand the backbone of that.
And I know, I think our firms are similar in this way. Everyone is a W-2 that works for Inspire, and they work on a part-time basis, but that was a decision that we just made very early on as I saw this conversation unfolding. So it was never a distraction. So that is just something I think for folks who are joining us, whether they're thinking of being interim experts or hiring, just to kind of keep that piece in mind. Elaine, Meryl, any thoughts on your end?
For me, I just have to echo what was said. It's just get good legal help and partnership, and make sure that you have great partners like you, Jamie, just that can help you at least figure out what's the question to ask. Right? Sometimes we don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And the only ads I would give, especially coming from an acquirer of interim talent from a corporate perspective, where you do have your legal partner there. If you are a frequent buyer of interim talent, two potentials. One is you look for someone that can do third-party aggregation, like Jamie, what you do, or if you see that there's kind of a consistent need, and because state and federal and global laws actually change with a high degree of frequency, pick your spot. Pick the place where you're going to actually go deep and do the major investments. So, internationally, we may go to Krakow, or domestically, we may go to Iowa and learn and be kind of focused in that space. So your legal partner in opportunity is not, running through the 1,000 different laws that could potentially be impacting your interim talent.
Because you bring these interim folks in to be efficient, and just that can be such a distraction from the speed at which they get up and running.
And that's just to piggyback on that. I mean, that's such an important point, because, I had a situation recently where the company was looking to hire employees, or at least contractors, in multiple states. And, those questions pop up really quickly, saying, listen, like, from a tax perspective, now you're paying taxes in a bunch of different states, but then more importantly, from that standpoint on the actual employee, now you're trying to navigate, 3, 4, 5 different, laws and rules. And that's just, it gets really messy really quickly, and it all starts compounding on it, right? Whether, your legal fees, or finding attorneys that understand all that. So that can't be, stressed enough from that perspective.
Absolutely. And what's interesting in being in this space for 14 years is that those laws are always changing. And in this moment in time where, guys, I hate to say, we are like coming up on our year anniversary of this little pandemic. I mean, the future of work is really becoming more about just getting the work done, and people are zip code agnostic. Think of, I feel like every day I speak to 3 people, and I hop on Zoom and I'm like, where are you? How's your family? Like, well, we started in Brooklyn, we've moved to fill in the blank, any cool city. And we're at this moment in time where it is really just interesting just to think about how so many of the labor laws are going to change, just about very much how work gets done, and work gets done very much virtually. People might be classified, their primary resident might be in a state, but they might be doing most of their work, in their mother-in-law's family room. And so all of that is another piece of the puzzle as well. Just another fun layer.
Really quickly on that, I'm sorry, Jamie, but like just really quickly on that, I've kind of seen it also flip too, where I understand it's the corporate responsibility, right? But we are seeing more individuals just choosing to move, right? To your point.
Absolutely.
And I have a close friend of mine that moved to Barbados, right? And they now, they're 6 months in, living on Barbados. He's working, the company's headquartered in Arizona or Texas, I can't remember, but just starting to unwind all that for him right now, where he's like, oh, like I'm 6 months in, all I thought about was from the personal standpoint, not even from the corporate standpoint. Now I have to sit down, work with my CEO, work with the team, and just try to figure out, like, was this even a right move, right? And so that's something that he's just scratching the surface, but it's something that I think as as business leaders, we have to continuously have that dialogue with our employees.
And especially during this time where so many people did move to their mother-in-law's family room to work from the dining room chair because their apartment was a modest size and it was hard with the dog and the 3 kids. And now the people in my life were like, so I'm still working from there and I'm actually investing in a good ergonomic chair and a lamp because like my back's hurting with the dining room chair. It's just, we are at the 12th month, and the strongest leaders and organizations that we're talking to have just accepted this is the way that we're going to work for a period of time, and then building a strategy around that. And I think that Interim, in this time when no one knows kind of what the future of several industries will be, Interim is a way to have that choice and leave choices open of how much you want to invest in perhaps some other full-time roles, or just have someone do fractional work for a while. One of the unexpected benefits we have always found is that interim talent can often end up providing upskilling and coaching to teams that might be more junior, just perhaps they haven't experienced the thing that the interim person comes in to surgically do. And I'm wondering if there are any strategies we could share with participants around how to plan for that upskilling and coaching that tends to happen, rather than it being kind of a happy accident that occurs. Meryl, do you want to kick that one off?
I would say definitely prioritize the key skills that you want to make sure are acquired by the internal employee. So how do you want to groom them? How do you want them to grow? And then obviously have the conversation with the interim talent, but it's really about ensuring that there's a plan. So at the contracting stage, at the very beginning, you have, how are you going to actually share that learning? And then that sustainability going forward. How can you help prepare that person so they actually pick it up? So Elaine's story from before, that she had time capsule moments, that's fantastic, right? So you're building in that skill and moving forward.
Absolutely. Elaine.
Yeah, so I'll add in a little bit and totally align with where Maribel was going. I think, when I'm assessing interim talent, I often will ask questions about what's their superpower. And, it helps you get a sense of what is the external perspective they're going to bring in that you don't currently have in your team, and also what charges them up. Most people don't share a superpower they don't want to demonstrate. Like, if they can see through walls, they want you to know they can see through walls. So I think that's kind of a key to really assessing, is this interim talent the interim talent you want to bring in? And also, as we were prepping for this a couple of days ago, I remember we were talking about, I brought up an old school book, which is Peter Block's Flawless Consulting. And as I mentioned it's an old school, like it's 20 years old plus, but all of us were like, oh yeah, that's the Bible on this. And the key to it is about negotiating your contract up front and identifying the win-win for both. And I think those two things combined help get you to really understanding where you have, unexpected benefit from the relationship.
Absolutely. Gail, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the way, I think similar to Inspire as well on that front. I mean, we do take an active role in having that conversation, that regular conversation. And part of it is you're just building a deeper engagement with your client, as being on kind of the other side of it, being that interim talent, if you will. And, sharing a lot of that information. And part of it is, as we're working with these founders, with these CEOs, it's sharing with them and kind of coaching them through. So we've kind of built that in. It's a little bit more passive, right? Versus like, but it's such a great way to build a relationship with your client, and then also work through, help them learn. Many of our CFOs will attend board meetings and things like that. And so, we view this as really a coaching. Some founders don't want it, right? Some they're like, hey, this is my third startup. I'm good to go. I don't need any of that. Just give me the financials, and that's fine too, right? But I think it's good. It's good to create that dialogue back and forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we have folks joining us with all different perspectives. We're going to launch another poll before we go into the next topic on onboarding and policies. And so the poll will come up. We would love for you all to weigh in, but I'll tell you that from our last poll that we kicked off the program with, where we asked, what are folks most looking forward to do? Hugging was not the first one. It was more than 60% of folks cannot wait to travel. So that was a front runner there. Travel is on folks' minds for sure. And as I look at this poll, we have folks answering now. The question here is, what is the primary reason you see using interim talent? And it looks like, yeah, a whole bunch of different responses, but it looks like the majority is helping lean teams deliver results. And it's interesting, we found so many organizations really looking to get that interim help, especially as the pandemic happened, because teams, I feel like it's been a triathlon for comms and finance and HR and real estate, but just to really think through how to reimagine distributed workforces and lean teams who are tasked with that. And then after the murder of George Floyd in early June, when there was this overdue light shined on racial inequity in so many corporate structures, so many HR people, those same teams were tasked with, can you also now come up with a whole diversity strategy, right? Around, the business case, and I always say the human case for DEI. And so those helping those types of lean teams get work done, I think just helps our HR colleagues get a little bit of their nights and weekends back. Okay, on to onboarding policies and planning. So there's a bit of a misconception among some leaders that interim, fractional, contingent, gig workers can be brought in with very little preparation because they're often very skilled and then just kind of let loose. And we've always seen tremendous success when there's more of a plan for onboarding, also dealing with how to share information, deal with things that are confidential in nature and other potential conflicts that can arise. So I'd love to hear wisdom from each of you on how you've seen both employers and interim professionals really work together to make that transition as smooth as possible. And Maribel, why don't we kick it off with you?
Well, certainly at the contracting stage, having the conversation, right? What does the onboarding look like? And if you're an interim worker, definitely saying, these are the things that I would need within the scope in order to get to that goal that we have set out. But from the employer side, really thinking that if you have a great onboarding process, there's no reason why not use that to bring on that new person, the interim. If you don't, ask those individuals in the organization, what worked for you when you first came on board? What didn't? What shouldn't we do? Okay. And there you have your list that can help you guide that onboarding.
Okay. And do you recommend getting as tactical as passwords, LastPass, all the pieces around compliance and sharing of data to get that granular
absolutely.
At the start?
I mean, think about it in terms of you want them to come in 9 a.m. and start working. So what will help them do that and then make it happen?
Gael, thoughts from you? Or Elaine?
Yeah, from that standpoint, I mean, we have a very formal onboarding process, and we sign a new client, and it's very much, as Maribel's kind of touching on some of those aspects of it, is like, it's just a lot of the blocking and tackling and trying to get that out of the way, right? The sharing of accounts, passwords, here's where you go for what. I found that that's been really, really successful on really identifying each of those different steps. And if you do plan as a business to continue to engage with interim talent, it's nice to have that process or that framework so that you can give them a head start on jumping in and doing the job. But part of it is nuance as well, right? Just truly understanding, like, hey, where do I go for what? Like, who's going to answer these questions? I mean, I think setting up that hierarchy internally as well and communicating that to the interim talent can be very helpful, because CEOs, founders are extremely busy, right? And so part of it is like, you can't always be there to answer the questions, but sometimes that's the one point of contact. So making sure that you've got kind of that fallback as well, I think can be really important.
It's a really good point. Elaine, thoughts from you?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that. So I think a couple of tips, especially if you're bringing in interim talent to a corporation. First, find them a buddy. So they have that person they can go to for asking all the questions, in addition to what they already contracted when they were coming on board. And also, especially in those places where you really have to watch for co-employment and you really have to watch for potentially your CISO or the data security. There are places where you can't actually have them come into the systems that you have in the organization. So that buddy can help them gain the access to what they meaningfully need to do their job, but not so much as to cause risk to the organization. And I think that is like a key way to kind of make sure that interim talent is integrated, but they aren't trying to kind of navigate without any form of direction whatsoever.
It gets me thinking a little bit about another don't, speaking of co-employment, the the situation that can arise where somewhere in the engagement, the interim person ends up in a conversation about moving into a more permanent role. And I'd love to just touch on that reality. Harvard actually just did an article on that in December. And I think that, with Inspire, we work so hard to really screen for experts who have said, I've done the soul searching. I've decided I just want to work fractionally. And this way we know that we can very much present them. And the idea is that the person can do, multiple projects, be extended, et cetera. And it gives that continuity to our clients. But everyone goes in with different expectations sometimes. So with that, I would love any wisdom on how to just handle that issue that could possibly come up.
Well,
Gael,
just
do you
to
want to
chime
start?
in
Yeah.
on, so to chime in, we're very much the same way, right? Where, our staff is our staff, and they're working on multiple projects at any given time with multiple clients. And so it really is kind of, having that clear line of, hey, if you want to hire these folks, we're not a recruiting agency. So, it'd be much more expensive charge at the end of the day.
Mhm.
But it happens, right? And I
Mhm.
think people's goals change, and sometimes you're working with a really interesting company and becomes super passionate about that business.
Yeah.
But I think to that point, it happens, and I think if there's an expectation there, then you just got to be clear. I think, again, kind of coming back to that communication and
Mhm.
that regular check-in, I think is really important as well.
Sure.
Having that continuous check-in and saying, hey, where do you stand? Where do I stand? Are you taking on new engagements? Like things like that can be really
Mhm.
important.
Just to always be doing a temperature check in addition to those expectations up front. Elaine.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, and I'm probably going to keep using this relationship perspective so often.
Okay.
So this is so where like the prenup is required. So when you're doing your contracting up front, this is where you can actually say, so if this circumstance comes up, how will we handle it?
Mhm.
And just like, the prenup is basically, you do not want this marriage to end, but you prenup to know how we're going to handle it if it does.
Right.
I think that's kind of a really good way to kind of start up front, because occasionally, to Goodell's point, you can actually have that chemistry or the passion comes
Sure.
up, and you don't want people's careers to be stalled, because ultimately it will not end well for either. And I think when it does come up and you didn't anticipate it in your prenup, this is where direct and straightforward communications are required.
Mhm.
And it's really, this is always a relationship. And the more people know what's going on, the more transparent you can be in that relationship, the more successful the relationship will be.
Yes, absolutely. The prenup, I'm loving that. I'm writing all these things down. Meryl, any thoughts from you before we go to the next question?
And just underlining what has been said, but really
Okay.
don't drag out the feedback. So if someone is hinting that perhaps they want to stay, just this was the contract, this was the scope,
Mhm.
and give the feedback, and vice versa. I had one client that was systematically going through every single interim talent, and everybody got really uncomfortable because everybody had the commitment to not be a full-time employee. So had to figure out, how do we give the client this feedback that, nope, thanks, but no thanks, right?
Yes.
So don't drag out that moment, just get it done.
Yes, and I think it's interesting. The model, this rise of interim talent, it is a defining piece of the economy during this era, but it is still new. I mean, this whole model of more temp to perm and recruiting agencies, I think, has been more the norm for certainly many, maybe baby boomers, Gen Xers. So this model is a newer one. So it's a little bit sometimes about educating the client about what you are and what you're not, just so that it's clear from the start. There are so many questions in the chat, and in about just 4 minutes, we're going to move to that. So if anyone has questions, please pop them in. We'll definitely be getting to those soon. But as we wind down with the questions that we had thought might be most helpful to touch on, I'd love to hear from each of you. Can you think of a time that you were struggling with a problem or a gap, and you need to bring very precise skills, and looking back, you wish you had brought in interim talent to solve for it? Elaine, if you want to kick that one off.
Oh gosh. Yeah. And I think the obvious time when it's always a look back, and it's when you just underestimated something. So it'll be that you've actually, when that has happened to me, and I have a specific case when I was at Cisco, actually, when we were doing an implementation of a performance program, and I knew that we needed change management up front in the program, and thought we had it in the team, and we had great people on the team. But let me tell you, we underestimated the change lift that was required to actually effectively implement that program. And, if I had my time machine, and when we debriefed the whole team after we launched, actually, when we did our after action review, the time machine was filled with interim talent that were experts in change management that would have come in and really made it so our implementation was smooth as silk. The implementation did go well, but it was on the backs and heavy labor of a lot of people that would have been incredibly better if we had brought in the interim talent up front.
Yeah, I think that sometimes interim talent ends up being a retention strategy for staff that you adore, because otherwise, whether it's a parental leave where people are doing 2 jobs and a half while someone's out, or people go out for happy reasons and sad reasons, life happens, and but it can get long, and the hours can be grueling for teams. So I think it often is a retention strategy. Yeah.
Could not agree more. I think it's a beautiful way of phrasing it.
Yeah. Gabriel, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, we had a situation where, I'm a sales guy at my heart, right? And so I want to say yes to everybody and be able to service everybody, right? So I think from the opposite side, we had a situation where one of our clients was just growing really quickly, and they were becoming more late stage, and just needed more of a full-time kind of the truer interim, like, hey, we're going to go for a 3-month project, almost full time. And we just tried to squeeze it in with the staff we had. And our staff could do it, absolutely, but it's just not our model, right? And so the lesson learned there is just really understanding, a big part of it was on me, but also I think a part of it was on the company, truly realizing, like, is Gadiel a staffing agency, or is he, kind of that ongoing interim resource, right? Truly fractional. And so saying no for me is really hard from that perspective, and being able to not service a client. But it just wasn't a fit, and we found it broke really quickly, right? And that goes back to, like, you don't want to break those relationships. You want to make sure that you're providing and understanding kind of the scope and capability of whoever you're engaging at that point.
Well said. Meryl, thoughts from you from the expert perspective? Yeah,
I would have employers really think about the reputational cost. So working with a client, they had a massive rollout of Workday, and it was just the stop began a little bit of chaotic, and the internal stakeholders really suffered, right? So if they had brought in that talent, a lot smoother, and the reputation would have remained intact.
Okay. We're going to wrap, before we go to questions, with what I call the lightning round. So in summary, I'd love to hear from each of you. What is your top do and your top don't that you would tell HR leaders when it comes to engaging interim talent? So Maribel, we'll start with you.
I think you've heard a theme like we did at the when we practiced this, the contracting, right? So it's so critical to set those expectations. And in terms of the don't shy away from the difficult conversations when you need to, right? And it's not difficult. It's really about providing the feedback that you need to make it a success.
Elaine.
Yeah, I'm going to keep to this theme I've been trying. So where Maribel was, the 2 do's, prenup and cocktails. Like, give yourself a pilot if you get a chance. Make sure you've contracted really effectively. If you did not do your prenup and you're already in the relationship, go back and do it again. And then on the don't, it is about address issues with urgency and authenticity, and make sure that you are not letting it lag. And just to keep with that dating theme, sometimes they're just not that into you. You need to move on.
MoveOn.org. Yes. Gadiel.
Well, I mean, I think we got the dating theme down, right? So we got to just double down on that. That's fantastic. I love that. I think, the number one to do is that communication and understanding what that scope of work is, right? Like, whoever or whatever function you're trying to solve, having a clear understanding of that and communicating that to whoever's going to fill that need. And it kind of ties back to the don't, it's rip the Band-Aid off early, kind of that point. Like, if it's not working out, just rip it off. Like, it's better to just do that early versus waiting, because then you're just going to have to unravel a whole mess from that.
Yes. And the good news is, if the fit isn't there, there are other experts that can potentially parachute in and give, and quickly get up to speed, so there isn't that much of a business disruption.
And you can always be friends, right? If it doesn't work out, you can still be friends.
Exactly.
Right? Like...
Exactly. Precisely. Okay, we have tons of questions, right? Let's do the first one. have you experienced any onboarding challenges for interim talent that were less predictable? So Elaine had given the example of change management project, but are there other things that you can touch on where the onboarding challenges were less predictable?
Well, to chime in there, I think it's having an understanding of like, you can't, these individuals, the interim talent, whether it's a firm, whether it's an individual, it's not turnkey, right? So I think we kind of touched on this earlier, where you can't just expect somebody to like, hey, here's what you need to do, go do it. So both sides need to invest a little bit of time to really kind of, it's building the frame of the house, right? Before they can actually put the roof on it. So that's part of it, is the expectation shouldn't be, oh, it's just immediate, but I got to put in some time to make this successful as well.
Okay, that's great.
What I would add to that, just it's the decision rights, right? So when how are the decisions made? Who's going to make it? Sometimes there is an assumption, right? The person that brought you in will make the final decision, and then, oh, surprise, that's not the case. So to make things smooth, just that discussion is so critical.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think they're dead on the money.
Okay. Okay, next question that someone was curious on. We're all more used to remote work these days, but do you think it's beneficial to source this kind of help from someone who is local and can be with you on site as needed? So what's kind of the local remote consideration now that we're going into the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic, right? The old model, we used to always say, our folks can do a hybrid of working on site, remote as needed. But in this new paradigm, what are your thoughts on the remote local considerations?
So I'll actually chime in on that one. And I actually think this is the sourcing question most organizations are actually trying to figure out right now. It depends on the work. I think it's the bottom line, that there is some work where if in pre-pandemic times and what will be post-pandemic times, on-site will create acceleration, on-site will create faster to market. And there's some times where it just doesn't matter, that people are going to be very effective wherever they're sitting. And I think that type of, just like organizations are going to need to become more flexible and comfortable with hybrid working, I think individuals are going to need to be as well. And that's going to start hitting on people's personal preferences of introversion and extroversion. And again, the type of work, where the type of work has the most impact.
Such an important point. Just because, one of the things I do when I hire as well is some people are just wired for the office, right? They want to be in a cubicle next to somebody else. They want to like do the water cooler talk. And I think there's been a lot of adjustment over the last 12 months in terms of just how we communicate, how often we communicate, and what the culture of the business is. So you really have to take an introspective look, I think. But to Elaine's point, like there's just some functions that you just need a body there. You just need somebody there.
Absolutely. And that is yeah, please.
Sorry, go ahead, Jamie. Sorry,
no,
Jamie.
go.
I realized as Gadel was talking, I'm like, one other thing. The more organizations, we've learned this actually in most organizations, that hybrid working, there's a huge advantage, not only for like, when do you bring them closer, when do you inside and out, but the diversity of talent, the quality of talent, the capability of talent, the more you can open your aperture, creates a tremendous amount of potential options for you.
Absolutely.
So just to put a pin on that. So, Jamie, tomorrow, if I were hiring interim HR talent, historically at Splunk, where I'm currently working, I might have only hired in the Bay Area and made sure they were sitting in seats. Now I would have the entire portfolio of everyone sitting in Inspire at my disposal. So I think there's something about, if you want to create a diverse workforce and you want to actually make sure you're accessing the best talent for the work.
Yes.
It is something, like I said, it's part of the sourcing strategy for everyone, but specifically it's about, it can change what's most important to you. Butts in seats being most important, or most diverse talent being most important.
Absolutely. And right. So the sourcing strategy, I think that, as I've spoken to so many leaders since June, they said, what, Jamie, we realize that there is a certain wisdom that comes with lived experience of someone who's a Black colleague, a person of color. I don't have a sourcing strategy in place. I haven't lit up my network so much in, let's say, Chicago or Phoenix. And I say, we are all zip code agnostic. Let's get much more creative. All that means is you haven't found the right sources yet. All the talents there, have to find them. And the fact that we can now really source any state, hey, any place globally. I think it really is an advantage for this very specific moment in time where it is just so urgent that we change the absolute racial inequity that we're all swimming in. And I'm just on a mission to move that needle. Okay, next one. It takes time to ramp up and onboard a new hire, including a consultant, to the company and the culture. So give it to me straight. For a short resource gap, say like a 4 to 6 leave of absence, is it really practical to bring in an interim resource? What are some tips to vet someone on whether or not they can come in quickly and have that impact?
It really depends. I mean, if going back to the discussion we're having earlier, what's the impact to the current employees if they're not there, right?
Mhm.
And if it's not that much of an impact, do you really need that role, right? So I was trying to think about that. So, but really think about the engagement, how people are going to get burned out, and then prioritize what is it that we need this person to focus on 4 to 6 weeks. They're not going to be doing the entire role to the depth of that full-time person. So what do we need during this 4 to 6 weeks, and then on board for that?
Absolutely. I want to jump to the next question. Sometimes an interim person might become such an integral part of the team that we're susceptible to losing knowledge if they don't transition successfully. What are best practices in transitioning someone out of a role, especially when they have been doing such a great job?
I can jump in and start.
Yeah,
I have 3 thoughts in mind. And first of all, just to kind of call it, there's no perfection in this. But I think first it's actually setting expectations on what documentation looks like. What can they document that can be codified, that can be there after they've left? The second thing that I've actually seen is actually have I mentioned a buddy to help for onboarding.
Yes.
You can also have the buddy for offboarding, which is a person that is actually getting trained by them to do the work. And then the third I actually mentioned earlier, which is you put a long tail on your contract, which is they may be no longer working with you on a day-to-day basis, but you have them on retainer for an hour or 2 a month, where you can just do the ad hoc questions. Or they may say, I don't need to be on retainer. I'm just going to be a consultant that's available to you, but this is my limit. So it gives you, quantifiable and tangible outcomes that you could, like tangible transition documents, a human interface for transitioning, and then ultimately your parachute, which is being able to call them after the contract is ended.
Right. And sticking with the relationship analogy, it's kind of like when you break up with someone, but you stay friends and you're like, grab a movie every once in a while. I want to jump to the next one. Do you assess risk when you look at a potential client? How do you assess them to know they're organized and you trust their business model? So how do you risk assess a potential project before you go into it? Any wisdom on that?
Sometimes it's the sixth sense of just, you get to know them a little bit and you're just like, whoa, I don't know if I want to work with this person, right? I mean, I think for us, it's kind of talking through how they would do the work, how they approach it. I mean, it's an interview, right? It's an interview to get to know you, and you just kind of keep an eye out for some of those red flags. For us being kind of that fractional component to those businesses, sometimes we're just not going to be aligned. And I had a situation with the founder, and unfortunately we did bring on the company, but then pretty quickly, like, they weren't open in sharing the information. For us, like the finances, the reporting to investors, the reporting to lenders is such a key component. But if you don't have full transparency, then something fishy can be going on behind the scenes. And so, and that was the case with this, where we had to disengage with the client, and it was a hard breakup. It was a necessary breakup. The investors were coming to us saying, "Hey, we want you to stay on," and we're like, "We cannot provide appropriate, work product here, and so we have to go." So it's hard to break up, as we all know, but sometimes it's important, and sometimes better to not engage.
Yes. We have a question from someone who I believe is an interim expert themselves. How can interim executive leadership candidates find out what the organizational culture is really like for real? Any tips on helpful questions to ask in interviews to determine what it will feel like at the organization day to day? And listen, as I'm thinking through this, I guess it's similar to what you would do if you were looking for a permanent job. I always go on LinkedIn and see if anybody knows anybody who works here and can give me the skinny. Any thoughts from you on how to really find out what the culture is really like before you take on an interim assignment?
Yeah, can actually do it just from a to the recruiting end of it.
Yeah.
And I have kind of the getting the skinny side and also kind of the academic side. Getting the skinny side, Glassdoor and Blind are your friends, both of which can usually give you a sense of what is going on in the organization one level deep, especially Blind, because that's essentially the essence of why that's there. And then if you go from an academic perspective, you can look at the competing values framework, which is kind of the core to most culture assessment tools that are out there on the planet. And it basically is assessing two core things that most people are looking for, which is how process oriented this organization is and how internally focused this organization is. That's the axes of competing values.
Okay.
And if you're someone that likes to have the wild, wild west and very externally focused, and you find out an organization when you're asking questions is very policy driven and looking at their navels, wrong fit.
Right.
So it's a quick and dirty,
Yeah.
looking outside, and then also a framework that you can use that's, purely academic, but works really well.
Yes, absolutely. Great. And last question. How are policies around NDAs and confidentiality different for a contractor than an employee? Do we need stricter agreements do we need stricter agreements considering the interim professional could be working for a competitor next month? Fair question. It's funny, I know when we onboard folks to Inspire, we often get feedback that our documents are so long. We are just so crystal clear on just all the walls that are there. Just knowing that we encourage people to have that cross-pollination of knowledge because they work across different industries and clients. But any thoughts on this one?
I think that's a very heavy legal question. I think we do sign NDAs. We do go through strict background checks for our employees. We do make sure, but we work with such a diverse client base that sometimes it gets hard to know who's who's working on what and things like that. So it's definitely out there, but I think from a legal perspective, getting those ironclad documents are always great. Yeah,
absolutely. On that note, I want to thank you so much, Maribel, Elaine, Gadiel. Thank you for your wisdom. I just see all these comments in the chat. People are so thankful for all that you have shared. With that, if you have any other questions following up, you can always get us at hello@inspirehumanresources.com, longest email address ever, but you can get us there. And I hope that your loved ones continue to stay well during these times. And I think that spring might be around the corner in another month or two. So hang in there. Be well, and we'll see you next month. Thanks so much.